The watchmaker, Samstag. Herr Samstag lived in the flat above the archway on Blumenkreuzstrasse. Below was his workshop, and tucked within it a tiny shop. He was not a poor man, yet he was never quite rich enough. His bread and butter came from fixing alarm clocks and the kind of simple pocket watches that, with age, begin to lie like jealous relatives. His main income, such as it was, came from selling sundials. But who in Oberhausen, a city of perpetual clouds, would buy a sundial? Only eccentrics, posers, and tourists fooled by a rare, stray beam of sunlight. One evening, as the rain drummed against the grumbling old windowsill and Herr Samstag was cleaning the mechanism of a modest Kinsel, the door creaked. A man of about 40 entered. Silver had barely touched his chestnut hair, but his large, expressive eyes betrayed something ancient about him, as though a few hundred years ought to be added to his age. He was dressed modestly but neatly, a jacket with damp shoulders, a shirt of faded stripes, pleated trousers, and well-worn hiking boots. In his hands, a scuffed leather case. "Do you repair time?" the man asked. His voice was velvet, barely a whisper, yet it was the kind of voice that could make orders sound like polite requests. "That depends on the fault," Herr Samstag replied, not looking up from the movement, "and on whether you have the money." He was used to such questions and to the broken German of the newcomers. "The money can be found," said the man. "The fault, however, is unusual." He placed the case on the counter and clicked the locks open. Inside, resting on velvet, was not a watch. It was a clot of mist, a tiny, fluffy cloud, as if drawn by a child's hand. It pulsed as if alive, yet deep within one could see a real mechanism, gears, springs, and ruby jewels. Herr Samstag felt his old scars begin to ache. He had convinced himself long ago that this was a reliable sign of a genuine miracle. If something hurts, a wonder is near. "What is it?" asked the watchmaker. "This," said the stranger, "is time. But tomorrow does not arrive. Everything has frozen in the now. Yesterday, the day before, they still flow, but tomorrow does not. Something is blocking it." The watchmaker took his long-handled loupe, clicked on the old green-shaded lamp, and peered into the mist. The mechanism was not made of metal, but of what? At its very heart, caught between the gears, he noticed dozens of tiny glass moths, each the size of a match head. "Who are they?" asked the watchmaker, his surprise undisguised. "Ah," breathed the visitor, "those are your 'I'll call you tonight,' and we really must meet sometime. And those, over on the far edge, are your 'this isn't for me and it's out of my hands.' But they all bred from this one." He pointed towards the center. The largest moth, swollen with something red, was jammed in the heart of the mechanism. Its flanks were being gnawed by the teeth of the gears, which tried in vain to turn. The downy fuzz on its body had turned grey, signaling to Samstag the antiquity of its owner. "This is the first one," said the man. "This is where it all began. This is your 'I cannot do it.' It appeared 30 years ago, when you designed a mechanism that could have made you famous. But afraid of judgment from society, your peers, your family, you hid it in here." A tightness gripped Herr Samstag's chest. His eyes filled with the tears of regret. He stared at the moth covered in the dust of someone else's time, terrified, trembling. The moth had so desperately wanted to see what would happen after it disappeared that it had seized the thread of the future and stopped everything. "I see," whispered Samstag, "a foolish creature." "Powerful," the stranger corrected him gently. "The power of despair is immense." "No," the watchmaker exhaled. "I wasn't talking about the moth. I was talking about myself." He took his finest brush, made of Kalinsky sable, the softest he owned, and instead of tearing the moth out by force, he spoke to it. He understood what needed to be done for its release. He spoke about how he would not have been afraid to tell the world about his invention, how he would have built the first prototype, how his children would have been proud of him, and how those relatives who mocked his dreams would now be hoarding newspaper clippings with his smiling face. He spoke of the people his mechanism would have helped and the lives that would have changed because of its existence. He spoke of how wonderful it is to live a life brightly to the very end without glancing back at the void that follows. The moth listened to what could have been, and slowly it loosened its grip. Samstag used the tip of his brush to help it free and carried it to the open window. The rain had stopped. The moth sat on his finger for a second, unfurled its wings, and flew. As it rose, it drew the others after it. They flared in the moonlight and vanished into the night like falling stars, each one asking for a wish to be granted. The stranger closed the case. "Thank you," he said. "How much do I owe you?" "For what? For talking to a butterfly?" Samstag waved a dismissive hand. "I owe you my life." "Then live," said the stranger, "and do not break your tomorrow again." When the guest had gone, the watchmaker noticed several old minted coins on the counter. He sighed and shoved them into his pocket. Then he realized the watch he had been working on was ticking again, and ticking absolutely perfectly. From that day on, Herr Samstag never stopped time again. He accepts invitations. He indulges in sweets and other useless trifles, and he always remembers the eternity that once visited his workshop carrying a scuffed leather case